watched the heavy snowflakes that came down from the night sky. The streetlights gave them an orange tint, and yet they still reminded me of the white winters from my childhood, back from when my future was still a dream. I was sitting next to my boyfriend John, and his stupid friend at a Soldnakorv, a small Swedish diner close to the parking lot at the end of Valhallavägen. It was after midnight, and we had been the only customers. An hour earlier, I had left my home after yet another argument with my mom. She had yelled at me as usual, with her perpetual half-smoked cigarette placed between her shaking fingers. "You aren't allowed to hang out with those idiots. You're the fucking idiot, Mom. I swear to God, if your father was here right now. But he isn't, and he never is. He hates us, and he hates you, just like everybody else. Fucking bitch. You're nothing more than a little slut." I put on my green down jacket, still stained with spray paint after one of my fights with John, and left. John talked about one of his plans. He had a lot of plans, but they usually didn't amount to anything. "Look," he said, "the guy's never home. According to my contact, this guy is filthy rich, okay? That's why I wanted to meet you all here tonight. He lives right across the street, at number 45. My contact lives a few floors above him, and he tells me there's no risk involved here. You hear me?" "What do you want about now?" I said. "Don't sound so dismissive, baby. You never believe in me. If we pull this off, we'll never need to steal anything ever again. This guy, he owns paintings and stuff worth millions. We just need to break in and take it. It's just lying there collecting dust anyway." "We should do it tonight," John's friend said. "No," John laughed and looked at me, putting his arm around my shoulder. "You hear this guy, baby? Fucking Gustav. He doesn't understand shit. If we're gonna pull this off, we need to plan it. I mean, we need to come up with a plan so that we don't fuck up like we did with that old lady in the elevator. A few weeks earlier, he and Gustav had followed an old lady home and robbed her in the elevator, leaving her with a broken nose, only to discover she didn't carry any valuables." "So what's your plan then, smartass?" Gustav asked. "We have to make sure he isn't home." "How?" I asked. "Just listen. This is the easy part. My contact has given me an entry code to the building. All he wanted was some coke, and he told me everything I needed to know. Tonight, we will go there and place something in front of his door, maybe a hockey stick or something, and if it's still there in 2 or 3 days, it means he isn't home, just as my contact said." "My little brother has a hockey stick," Gustav said. "We can go and get it at my place and come back." "That's what I thought. Anyway, when we have made sure the guy isn't home, we park my car outside and bring some tools. You know, a crowbar and whatnot, and break in. It's going to be easy." "You always say that," I said. "Yeah, but this time it's different, baby. This time we have inside information." After talking about this for a half an hour, we stood up to leave to get the hockey stick at Gustav's place. "Hey, where do you think you're going?" It was the man at the cash register, a Middle Eastern man. "You haven't paid." John walked up to him with a smug smile on his face. "Oh, I'm sorry," he said, and pretended to try and find his wallet. "It doesn't look like I have any money with me today. But hey, what are you gonna do about it, old man? Huh?" He laughed. "I'll call the police, punk." "Good luck, fucker. You know they'll just return to you with a letter that says they've discontinued the preliminary investigation, and that's how it always is, man." John threw everything on the counter to the floor and laughed hysterically. The old man fell silent. He knew there was nothing he could do. Gustav began laughing as well. "Shut up, fat ass," I said. It made him angry. I could see it in his dumb eyes, but he was too afraid of John to do anything about it. John would never let him hurt me, not in 1,000 years. At Hornstull, on our way to get the hockey stick, Gustav checked every vending machine in the subway station in the hopes that he would find something hanging loose, and today was his lucky day. He immediately began to tackle the machine from the side, but the candy wouldn't move. Some bystanders looked at us with dismay in their eyes, but no one said a word. He tackled it harder and harder. "It isn't going to work, stupid," John said. "We don't have time for this. Let's go." "No." Gustav's plump face had become red. He stepped back and charged the machine. He tackled it so hard that it fell over with a crash. Again, no one said a word. He grabbed some candy that came out and laughed his typical stupid laugh. It was almost as if he tried to sound as dumb as possible. Everyone was asleep when he snuck inside his house. John and I waited in the stairwell. Gustav's dad must have woken up because a fight broke out in the apartment. Gustav yelled profanities and his dad called him a fucking loser. "Where the fuck are you going with that?" we heard his dad yell. "I need it for a thing, Dad." He came out to us with a lamp. "This works, right?" I couldn't get the hockey stick. "Yeah," John said. "It will do." We arrived at the apartment at Valhallavägen in the middle of the night. Our voices echoed down the stairwell, even though we were whispering. Everything was dark since we didn't want to turn on the lights. Gustav caught a coughing fit when we stepped out of the old-fashioned elevator, and John tried to hush him up. John used his phone as a flashlight. He looked around at the doors. "Here it is," he said. "Give me the lamp." Gustav gave it to him. I looked at the letterbox. The name on it was Leif Anderson. Gustav crouched down and opened the letterbox to look inside. "It's pitch black," he whispered. "I don't think anyone is home. I'm not seeing anything. Not a single light." "You're an idiot. It's the middle of the night," I said. "Do you think people just leave their lights on?" He turned around and looked at me with hatred in his eyes, but again he didn't dare say anything. John was ecstatic when we entered the cold outside again. He was basically dancing rather than walking. Gustav tried to keep up with him, but he couldn't. "Hey, wait up, man," he yelled. I walked between them, watching John's tall, slim body move to music only he could hear. He seemed at peace, but he was never truly at peace. I knew that anything could happen when he was in this mood. On impulse, he picked up an electric scooter, spun around like an ice princess, and threw it right through a storefront window. The alarm went off inside. It echoed between the facades of the houses. No one turned their lights on. The windows remained dark as every other night. Gustav went inside and picked up some Christmas decorations that he put around his fat neck. We didn't even bother running away from there. A few blocks down, we stumbled upon a group of Romanian beggars sleeping next to St. Gregorio's church. John danced his way up to them and woke them up by kicking them. They couldn't move, trapped as they were inside their sleeping bags. "Hey," he yelled. "Wake up, motherfuckers, it's Santa." "John, come on," I said. "I want to go home." "Shut up, bitch. I'm just having some fun." I had to shut up, just as he told me, afraid he would turn on me. My worst nightmare was that he would break up with me. I loved him with all of my heart. More than I loved myself, in fact, and I wouldn't know what to do if he left me. One of the beggars succeeded in throwing some trash at John in an attempt to fend him off. John became furious. "What the fuck did you just..." He began kicking him even harder. "Are you throwing your fucking shit at me?" He stepped on the sleeping bag so the man couldn't get out. Then he unbuttoned his pants. "Help me out here, Gustav." John laughed as he pissed on the poor man on the ground. The others tried to get away, but Gustav stopped them with his heavy feet. I raised my gaze to avoid seeing what they were doing and saw the cross on the church, indifferently towering above us. We spent the rest of the night at John's place. His mom wasn't home, as always. Gustav played Fortnite on the computer, while John shared a joint with me. A few minutes later, he got up and retrieved a syringe and a rubber band from one of his desk drawers. "You told me you'd quit that shit," I said. "I just need to wind down a little, that's all," he said. "It's the last time, I promise. One last time before our last big score." He tied the rubber band around his arm. "No, please," I said, but he didn't listen. He injected himself and immediately dozed off. It always felt the same way, like he had suddenly left me alone, and this time he had left me alone with Gustav. I held his warm body, now relaxed in a way that it never was, and cried softly. Gustav hadn't even noticed. He just kept on playing while he yelled at the screen every time he was killed. The lamp still stood in front of the door to Leif's apartment. He wasn't home. This was a few days later, and in the middle of the day. John said fewer people would be home at this time, but it still made me nervous to be here at this hour. I was kind of impressed with how much effort he put into this. He had gotten us all some overalls that made us look like we were workers who were supposed to be there, and he had even brought a bag with a screwdriver, a putty knife, a small sledge, a pry bar, and some other tools I didn't recognize. Most likely he had stolen all of these items at some store. The overalls he got for me didn't really fit, and it made me look ridiculous. Who would believe a kid like me was some kind of electrician? But John still insisted I wear it. He then turned to Gustav and said, "Put on the fucking gloves." He had given us cotton gloves to wear, apparently the only ones that didn't leave any prints. My heart was beating rapidly. I had told him I didn't want to come, but he had insisted and said that it would be impossible without me. No one, he said, expected a girl to be a thief, but I didn't see myself as one either. I was just tagging along. Of course, this was delusional. I was responsible. I know that now. For the longest time, John and Gustav worked on the door while I stood behind them, trying to smile like everything was perfectly normal. John even went on fucking YouTube on his phone to watch some kind of tutorial. A resident from the floor above came walking down. John and Gustav immediately stood up and began faking a conversation about the work they were doing. Gustav couldn't follow John's quick change of personality and just stood there looking like a fool without anything to say. I thought I was going to have a heart attack, but nothing happened. The guy coming down the stairs didn't even look at us. As usual, no one gave a fuck about what we were up to. "Voila," John said, and opened the door. A flow of cool air, presumably the result of a cross breeze, escaped the apartment. The air smelled like the ocean somehow. When we closed the door behind us, darkness engulfed us. "This shouldn't take longer than 10 minutes, John said. Let's look for anything expensive that we can carry." Gustav tried to find the light switch but was stopped by John. "Don't turn on the lights, fat ass. The neighbors might see us in the windows if you do." As our eyes adjusted to the darkness, the inside of the apartment appeared in front of us. We were standing in the entryway. A corridor stretched out before us, connected to a kitchen, 4 rooms, and what looked like a bathroom door at the end of it. "Let's split up and look around," John said. "Let's meet here again in 10 minutes. "I don't want to be alone," I whispered forcefully. "Relax, baby, there's no one here." "No, please." "No, baby, there's no time to argue. Just do what I tell you. Take the room over there. I'll check this one out." I was shaking with fear when I entered the room he had pointed out to me. A creak of the large door made me cringe. This was worse than anything I had ever done. Deep inside of me, I knew this was a mistake. I mean, my entire life was nothing more than a collection of mistakes, but this was the biggest one yet. The room was as equally dark as the hallway. Deep purple curtains covered the windows. The size of the room was difficult to measure with my eyes, but it felt enormous. The furnishing and decor, together with the chandelier hanging from the ceiling, reminded me of more of a palace than an apartment. Although I couldn't see much color due to the darkness, I could tell the entire room was gilded. In the middle of the room, on top of a Persian carpet, there was a large table. Everything was set up on it just as if a dinner party was about to take place here. On closer examination, I noticed that the cutlery was made of gold. This was the kind of stuff we had come for. I silently picked it up and placed as much of it as possible into my pockets. Large oil paintings hung on the walls. They were probably worth a lot, but way too big to carry. They seemed to be hundreds of years old, but the motifs didn't depict the past. In one of the paintings, a crippled man could be seen standing in front of a large machine in a desert. Another one depicted the same man, his face twisted in pain as he was held down by someone dressed as a doctor. I soon realized that the same man appeared on most of the paintings, finding himself in different odd scenarios. I figured they were all telling parts of the same story. There wasn't enough time for me to figure out what the common thread was, but in the last painting, the man wasn't a cripple anymore. He stood tall, almost pompous, inside of what looked like a castle, wearing a black suit and dark sunglasses. There was another door to the left at the end of the room. I thought it was odd, since the building didn't seem big enough for apartments with this many rooms, but I didn't trust my sense of scale. The other room was smaller, but still pretty large compared to any of the rooms at my place. There was a group of leather armchairs here, some more bookshelves, and what looked like a pool table but without the holes. A large painting sat on an easel close to a large window, covered by curtains just like all of the other windows. It wasn't finished yet, but I could tell it was depicting a young woman in tears. Her face resembled my own in some eerie way. I turned my investigation to the table. On the side of it, there was a golden plate on which a text could be read. The forest. I couldn't understand the purpose of this table. There was nothing on it resembling a forest. I looked at my phone. It was almost time to head back. I looked around quickly, searching for anything that might be of value. That's when I noticed yet another door. How big is this place? I opened the door carefully to look inside. This room looked like a study of some kind. There was a large wooden desk against one of the walls, cluttered with papers, and the wall opposite had a board on it that was filled with news articles, photographs, and post-it notes with lines drawn between everything. It looked like an ongoing police investigation. I sneaked in and took a closer look. I didn't understand much of it, but at the center of it all, there was a large composite sketch of a young man. A name was written on a note connected to it with a big question mark at the end of it. Franz Oscar. I didn't find anything more of value, so I went back to the hallway. "Shit," Gustav said when he got back. "I almost got lost. There were like 4 different rooms, but look what I found." He showed me a collection of crystals. "They look expensive," he said. "Where's John?" I asked. 5 minutes later, he came back holding a painting in one hand and a bottle of wine in another. "Look," he said, "there was a room filled with old paintings. My contact wasn't lying. This guy is fucking rich." What's so special about that painting, Gustav said. I found fucking diamonds or something, man. Look at the signature, John said. It's fucking Picasso. Who's that? Gustav said. You fucking moron. Look at this wine, look at the year. It said 1892. That means it's expensive, right? Let's take another 10 minutes and see if we can find anything. Meow. Out of nowhere, a white cat appeared. It was sitting right in front of us. Meow. It kept muttering like this over and over again. Where the fuck did it come from? John whispered. I have no idea. Did you see it? Gustav said and looked at me. No, I said. Here, kitty kitty. I crouched down and held out my hand. The cat tilted its head and looked at it. Meow. Shit, John said. Someone is going to hear it. Shut it up, Gustav. Just make it stop. Gustav pushed me aside. What are you doing? I said as I watched Gustav grab the cat. Dude, what the fuck? No. Don't hurt it, please. No one will care if they hear a cat. But it was too late. Gustav grabbed the cat with his fat hands. It didn't try to escape, but as soon as he strangled its neck, it began to fight. But Gustav was too strong. I shied away. Tears ran down my face. Gustav chuckled stupidly as the cat lost consciousness. Stop, please, I said. When I opened my eyes, the cat lay dead on the floor. Meow. My blood ran cold. Gustav's dumb face went pale as he looked behind me. I turned around. Sitting on the floor was another identical cat. There are two of them, John said. It looks exactly the same, Gustav said, still stricken by fear. It's the same fucking cat. It's a twin, you moron, John said. Ever heard of twins? Something isn't right, I said. The cat appeared from thin air. I think we should leave. Can't we just... Shut up, bitch, John said and laughed. So stupid. I remember the next thing as if it happened in slow motion. First, there was a sound from the bathroom door. We turned around. The handle on the door was turning. John grabbed my hand. Slowly, the door opened up. A tall man with broad shoulders was standing in the doorway. Although I could only see his silhouette against the dark bathroom behind him, I immediately saw that it was him, the man from the paintings. He held something in his hand, a shotgun. He pointed it at us and stepped forward, wearing the same suit and sunglasses as he had done in the last painting. He looked down at the dead cat, while the cat that had just appeared ran up to him. You shouldn't have tried to kill my cat, the man said. We stood motionless under the threat of the gun. John's hand was sweating profusely just as his face. Who the fuck are you? He stuttered. I'm Leif, the man said. Sit down. Gustav immediately fell to his knees. I'm sorry, he said, and cried like a little boy. John followed suit and dragged me down on my knees with him. Good, Leif said. Now, look at me. Now, we're going to have a little chat, okay? We didn't respond. John, Gustav, and Katarina, Leif said. How do you... John began, but was interrupted. Leif pointed the barrel of the gun at John's chest. You're a bad guy. You've done unforgivable things, and somehow society has convinced you that you were untouchable. But you were wrong. You hear me, boy? You're nothing more than a scared little boy who never grew up. Pathetic. Please don't shoot us, Gustav said. It was all John's idea. Be quiet, Leif said. However much I hate evil people, I can have respect for them, but there's nothing worse than people like you. Evil cowards. Pathetic. You thought you could do whatever you wanted and get away with it. Don't you think I know? The girls you're watching online are too young, Gustav. And the girl you slept with last year, John, didn't give you her consent, did she? I glanced at John. Oh, don't you know that? Leif said as he looked at me. He cheated on you on several occasions. It's not true, baby, John said. Don't listen to him. He's crazy. How could he possibly know? Your boyfriend only loves himself, Katarina, Leif said. He loves being loved by you, but he has no love to give to you. Of course, you will likely believe him over me. What do you want? John said. Where did you come from? Your tiny mind wouldn't be able to comprehend the answer, Leif said. You're nothing more than an overgrown child. You don't know me, man, John said, trying to hold back his tears. You don't know what I've been through. I've seen stuff, you know, while you've been hidden away among your expensive stuff all your life, lived your comfortable life. I was out there on the street learning how to survive. "Oh, so you think you're experienced," Leif laughed. "Doing stupid shit doesn't make you experienced. It just makes you stupid. Let me ask you this. Have you ever had to let go of your lover's hand at the outer rim of a black hole? Have you ever had to kill billions to save trillions? Have you ever fought a demon? Have you ever survived the end of the world? Well, I have done all of those things and much, much more." "You're insane, man," John said. "I guess words just isn't enough," Leif said, "so let me give you some real experience, child." John's young, sensitive face was inexplicably changed into the face of a weather-beaten old man in the blink of an eye. I met his now ancient hollow eyes with panic in my own. His face expressed a bottomless sadness that spread into me. "John," I said with tears in my eyes, "what happened to you?" As he looked at me, still holding my hand but now with a looser grip, and mumbled something in a language I couldn't understand. "Don't worry, Katerina," Leif said. "He might not have lived a happy life, although I'm sure it had its moments, but he lived a long life." He turned to John again. "Time to die," and then he shot him in the chest. Gustav immediately got up, but the cat ran between his legs and made him fall to the floor. Leif walked up to him. I took my chance and sneaked into the other room. "Somewhere, you're happy," I heard Leif say before he pulled the trigger and shot Gustav in the back. "Katerina, where did you go? You don't need to be afraid." I ran through room after room for I don't know how long until I hid behind a dresser. I tried to calm my agitated breath down so I wouldn't be heard. Then I took out my phone and called 112, the Swedish equivalent to 911. A man answered. I didn't know where to begin. I didn't dare say anything about the burglary, so I started somewhere in the middle of it all. "A man just shot my friend. I'm hiding in his apartment right now. It's at..." I couldn't think straight and forgot the address. A door opened somewhere nearby. "Oh my God, I need help now. Please, he's armed." "Who's there?" the man on the phone said. "What's going on?" "Who is this?" I said, confused by his response. "I need the police." "I'm James," the man said, seemingly equally as confused as me, and then he said something that made no sense at all. "Do you know anything about the Clockwork Hotel? This is..." "What?" I hung up the phone. I had to run again. Leif yelled at me to stop, but I didn't listen. I ran through room after room without stopping. There always seemed to be another door. Sometimes I found myself in a room I had already been in, and yet I couldn't find my way back to the front door. The strangest room I found myself in contained several large terrariums filled with huge bugs with horrific stingers. I had to hide there for a few moments before I could continue. I tried to call the police again, but there was no signal. As soon as I heard Leif's footsteps outside, I got up and ran again. A few minutes later, I finally found myself back in the hallway. However, I was standing at the wrong end. Gustav lay in front of me with his face down like an animal struck down by a hunter, and a few meters behind him, John's aged, dead body lay on the floor in a fetal position. I was just about to make a run toward the front door, but before I knew it, Leif appeared in front of it, pointing his shotgun at me. I cried out, turned around, and without thinking, entered the bathroom and locked the door behind me as quick as I could. "No, don't go in there," Leif yelled. He ran toward the bathroom. I walked backward in pure fright, even though I had nowhere to go, until I reached the bathtub and accidentally fell into it. It was filled with a deep blue, almost black liquid. I stretched out my arms in an attempt to get up, struggling in the sticky liquid, but something was wrong. I couldn't feel the bottom of the tub, and however much I tried, I couldn't keep myself afloat. I sank further down than the tub would have allowed until my entire body was under the surface. I held my breath as I sank deeper and deeper into the bathtub. Moments before my reflexes would have forced me to try and breathe, my head breached the surface. I climbed out of the tub with shaking arms, taking a deep breath. The liquid didn't stick to my body. It ran off like water off a duck's back. The bathroom smelled musky, something I hadn't noticed before. Other things were different too. The door looked older, and it stood wide open. Leif was nowhere to be seen. I stepped out into the hallway. The bodies on the floor were gone. A sunbeam reached me when I passed by the kitchen. The curtains were gone as well. A thick layer of snow lay on the rooftops outside. I didn't reflect on any of this at the moment. Instead, I just opened the front door and got out as quickly as I could. Outside, the snow on the street reached my knees. It didn't make any sense at all. It had been plowed when we had entered the building. There still wasn't any time to think, though, so I plodded through the snow with tears running down my face. When I got to my street, I noticed rusty cars hidden under the snow. I picked up my phone and tried to call the police again, but there was still no signal. The sky was clear, clearer than I had seen it in a long time. I knew Leif would see my footsteps in the snow, so I tried to move as quickly as I could. However, there was no sign of him. Everything was silent. All I heard was the ringing in my ears from the gunshots earlier. When I reached my school, I entered the yard to see if anyone was there. This was the first day after the Christmas holidays, so the place should have been filled with kids, but it was empty. Where was everybody? I kept going. A loud mechanical sound pierced through the clear air. It was impossible to tell from which direction it came. Nothing felt right. I entered the school. There I saw the first people since I left the apartment. They weren't alive, though. 3 teenagers, judging by their clothes, sat on a bench. Their bodies looked mummified. A sheet of light descended upon their frozen corpses. I wanted to scream in horror, but I had to hold it inside. My entire body was shaking with fear at this point, and I could barely move from the terror. The sound outside got louder and louder, but eventually quieted down. At that point, I left the school from another entrance. This time, I took the time to erase my footsteps behind me using my hands. I did this until I stepped around a corner and onto another street. I walked down to Odengaten, a broad street close to my home, and walked past Vesseparken, a park where I used to play as a kid. It didn't look like it used to. Instead of the ice rink in the middle, there was a huge crater covering most of the area. I walked past all this, trying to figure out what had happened. It was as if the entire world had changed and ended during the time I had spent in the apartment. Outside of a burnt-out 7-Eleven, a few streets away from my home, I read the headline still hanging in their frames. "Who are they?" it read in large letters. The year was wrong. It said it was 2010. I had been 7 years old then. I walked to the street where I lived. I didn't know what to expect. I just wanted to get home and lie down in my bed. Perhaps I would wake up and discover it had all been a nightmare. Before I entered the building, I looked back down the street, and through the frosty fog escaping my mouth in the cold, I saw something impossible floating in the air. I could tell it was enormous, although it looked small because of the distance. Of all things I had experienced this day, this scared me the most. A black entity, vaguely resembling a jellyfish, hovered over the city. Its tendrils, more than 100 meters long, almost reached the rooftops. It gave me such a strange feeling of otherworldliness. This place, this version of Stockholm, wasn't right. Reality had warped in some unfathomable way, and that thing, that indifferent creature, was the reason. But I didn't belong here either. I was just as misplaced as the monster in the sky, and perhaps equally monstrous. The elevator didn't work, so I had to take the stairs. There were cracks in the walls, just as if the building were about to collapse. I knew this wasn't really my home, but I had nowhere else to go. I used my key to open the front door. It worked. Aside from the thin layer of ash covering everything, I recognized the apartment, but it didn't look like it had looked this morning. It looked like it had looked when I was 7 years old. My toys lay spread out on the floor in the living room. Our old television stood in front of the sofa we had thrown away 2 years ago. A sadness emerged from the depths of my soul. A normal day, a day I had long since forgotten that had been frozen in time in this world and never come to an end. I opened the door to my room. My heart sank, and sadness bubbled up from the bottom of my being and forced itself out of me in the form of tears. In front of me, sitting in my old rocking chair, my mom sat, holding my 7-year-old self in her arms. Both were mummified, and yet I could see the love in my mom's eyes and my own as well. I heard the last thing I had ever said to her in my mind. Fucking bitch. Everything had been normal once. There had been love in my life, and I had been happy. A happy little girl who didn't know about rubber bands, needles, and broken hearts. When did it fall apart? I fell on my knees in front of them and sobbed uncontrollably. Mom. Mom. If only there was a way to change. A shadow entered the room. A tendril passed by the window. It was here, right above me. No. I left the room, but I didn't know where to run. I felt something entering my mind. Not a voice exactly, but a feeling that wasn't mine. It became stronger and stronger. I couldn't understand it. It was an emotion I had never felt before, and it wasn't mine. It wasn't mine. It was not mine. I put my hands over my ears and yelled, "Make it stop!" I turned around. My vision was blurred. Leif stood in the doorway, his eyes still covered by his sunglasses. The next thing I remember was him carrying me in his arms. The noise from before was back, but much louder. My nose was bleeding. Leif sat me down behind him on a snowmobile outside. "Hold on to me, Katarina," he yelled through the horrible sounds coming from the jellyfish above us. "We're going home." It wasn't until I returned to the other side of the bathtub that the nightmarish feeling from the monster disappeared. Leif didn't do anything to stop me from leaving, and without a word to him, I ran out of his apartment. I never intend to return. I considered calling the police and reporting the murder of my boyfriend and his friend, but in the end I chose not to. I knew it wouldn't have made any difference. Everything was changed now. I don't know who Leif was, or if he was good or evil, but without him finally putting an end to the life I lived, I would have never hugged my mom at the end of that horrible day. I would have never told her the words I stopped telling her sometime before I met John. I love you.